Hello again. Welcome to the Data Science Seminar from the University of Washington eScience Institute. As part of the University of Washington, we acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Our speaker today is Dr. Mohammad Dehghani Ashkezari, who is a principal research scientist at the University of Washington School of Oceanography, where he is the project lead of the Simons CMAP data portal. He earned his PhD in physics at Simon Fraser University and CERN, European Council for Nuclear Research, studying matter-antimatter asymmetry. He followed with his postdoc appointment at MIT, working on the ocean surface current turbulence models. While at MIT, he started developing a software stack to unify and integrate ocean datasets, a project that formed the foundations of the Simons CMAP data portal supported by the Simons Foundations. Today, Mohammad will talk about this project, Simons CMAP, Harmonized Global Ocean Data Portal for a multidisciplinary analysis. As usual, please use the Q&A feature of the Zoom to ask questions, preferably at the end or during Mohammad's presentation, but he will address these questions at the end. And with that, Mohammad, please take it away. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and organizing this session. Thank you all for attending this talk. Okay, let me just jump right in with a simple definition of Simons CMAP. What is Simons CMAP? The Simons CMAP, it's a database. It's a database of harmonized ocean data sets. And one of the main goals of the project is to help with what I call synthetic data analysis. Now, by harmonized, I mean all data sets in CMAP, they all have a unified data model, data structure. And by synthetic data analysis, I mean the type of studies that, that involve blending multiple different data sets with each other, multiple different data sources with each other. So potentially multidisciplinary type studies. So Simons CMAP is a database where all data sets within, they all have the same data structure. And it's really tuned to help with the process of interconnecting all these data sets with each other so collectively we can learn from them. So during the presentation, I'll try to provide a little bit more context. Hopefully would clarify this definition a little bit more. Now, in general, we know that synthetic data analysis in general is meta-scale type analysis can be very challenging. For one thing, data is scattered all over the web. So we need to know which data exists and where. But that's not the only issue. A lot of time, data sets, they have like their metadata is not ideal. So descriptions is missing, the definition of variables is not very clear, or they come in various formats, sometimes just like very old formats, sometimes just like cutting edge type file type. So we always need to kind of deal with these varieties. And sometimes simply data sets are just massive, especially in sort of earth sciences. They can be very large in size. And so simply transferring them over the network can be quite challenging. The point being, every time we want to do this type of analysis, we need to overcome these challenges over and over again just to prepare the data so that later on we can do analysis. And with CMAP, our goal is to minimize this preparation phase which typically takes a significant fraction of time. And this way we can focus more on the actual analysis. And the way we hope to achieve this goal is closely connected with the inner workings of CMAP and how actually CMAP works. So everything starts with collecting data. So we get data from mainly from our collaborators, which are about 30 international institutions and universities. They're all supported by the Simons Foundation. So we get data from them. We also get data from public repositories. We turn all of these data sets into our unified data model, which is very simple. I'll show you in a second. And we also add a consistent layer of metadata on top of these data sets. Specifically, we add a semantic layer, which is really a series of related keywords. And this semantic layer will help a lot with improving the data discoverability. So it makes the data sets a lot more findable. I'll show you some examples. So once the data is clean and it's in the unified data model, we then ingest them into our database systems. Database is a sort of a key component of Simons CMAP because obviously it holds data itself, but also it holds certain important low-level functions that are responsible for some important data manipulation operations, things like efficient data slicing or simple aggregation functions. So all of these functions are embedded into the database layer itself, which means any downstream application, they can just invoke these functions and get the data back. And in that sense, CMAP is programming language agnostic. In terms of size, it's about 100 terabytes in size right now, but it's also growing constantly. On top of the database, there is a web API, so a REST API, which is essentially the gateway to our data layer. It also isolates the data layer from the application layer, which is on top of the API. Currently, we have a website. This is our web app, as well as a number of programming packages in Python, R, MATLAB, and Julia. So today, I'm going to give you a quick tour of our website and our Python package. Okay. Now, in terms of content in CMAP, we have data from all sectors of oceanography. We have data from sort of observation type data, direct in-situ observations, like measurements made during any cruise or by autonomous vehicles. We have data from numerical models, and also we have data from remote sensing type data sets. Currently, we have mostly satellite data sets. These are some example data sets from each sector. And as I said, they're coming from various sources, mostly from our collaborators, but also we get data from public repositories, from NASA and NOAA and other places. We turn them all into a very simple data model. They all will form into this simple data model. Every data set can have as many variables as is needed, that they can go there. But it is guaranteed that every data set has time, latitude, longitude, and depth in a standard format. Data sets are stored in table objects, which means if you want to download data using our programming packages, this is a little snippet of our Python package. I'll discuss that a little bit more when we look at our notebook. So if you want to download data using our package, Python package, you need to know the table name of the data set, as well as the name of the variable that you want to download. And I'll show you where you can find these information, the table name and the variable names. Okay. And because all data sets are in this simple sort of space-time based model, it's a lot simpler to create short and concise APIs for both visualization and analysis purposes. For example, if you want to make a map using CMAP, usually it's just like one line of code, and that's regardless of the variables or data sets that you want to make a map of. So you can simply replace the variable name and data set name or table name, and the API interface still will remain the same. More importantly, if you want to interconnect two very different data sets with each other, we call it co-localization. If you want to join these two very different data sets in this hypothetical case, there is a cruise trajectory, let's say, and you want to get satellite temperature measurements along track of this cruise. If you want to do that in CMAP, because again, all data sets are in a internally, they're all in a unified format. It can be done by almost one line of code. So using this function called sample, you can pass your data set. In this case, can be just like a cruise trajectory. And then you would say, okay, co-localize or this data set, the cruise trajectory with satellite data set. This is the table name of the, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but like this is the table name of the satellite. And this is the actual variable name where we want to co-localize with the cruise trajectory. SST stands for sea surface temperature. And that's it. So if you want to match this cruise or this trajectory, it can be any trajectory, it can be your own data set. So the source needs to be just a Panda data frame. You pass it to the source. It only needs to have time, latitude, and longitude, and depth columns. That's the only requirement. It would basically co-localize that with any data sets here that you've passed. In this case, I have only one, but you can add as many data sets. It should exist. The target data set, they need to exist in CMAP. And everything happens at the sort of the CMAP server side. So it makes the whole operation a lot simpler because everything happens on the back end where the data is. So there's no need to transfer the data around. You basically pass your data set, you co-localize it with any other data set you want, and it will return the results back. Okay, we have used this feature quite a bit in our own research studies. And next, I want to actually show one of those studies that we used CMAP, specifically this co-localization feature quite a bit. Except that here, I don't want to focus too much on the actual analysis techniques, even not on the scientific motivations or significance of this study, except I would like to highlight the role of CMAP, how CMAP can help us to do this type of large scale multidisciplinary type studies. So the goal here is to train or build a model, in this case, a machine learning model, that can provide estimates of spatial and temporal distributions of certain important cyanobacteria, Proctococcus, Synechococcus, and small eukaryotes, picoeukaryotes, by learning from the existing archive measurements of these organisms' abundances. Okay, so then the first step is to gather as much as possible of these organisms abundance measurements at the global scale. And that itself could be tricky because sometimes, especially like years ago, and the measurements have been made, sometimes actually there's no digital form of the data sets. You need to extract them from literature. But all of these have been done already in CMAP, and they're all in the same sort of clean format and structure. The time of this study, we had about 40 years or 4 decades of these organisms abundance measurements, both at the ocean surface and at the depth. There was about 237,000 independent samples of these organisms abundance measurements. So the first step was just to compile them. I'll show you in the notebook section that this process itself can be very simple. It's just basically identifying the data sets and downloading them. And potentially, if you want, you can concatenate them together. Then we need to add some context here. In this case, we want to add some environmental context, meaning we want to know what was the environment like at the time and location of each one of these measurements. What was the temperature? What was the salinity? What was nutrient fields? And this is essentially the equalization process, which can be quite tricky for 40 years of data, global scale. It's just not practical to be done on sort of a local machine. So in this case, we colocalized our 40 years of data with about 50 different contemporaneous environmental variables that are coming from other different data sets in CMAP. There we have data sets that are essentially direct measurements and have temperature, salinity, and nutrient fields, or we colocalize the data with satellite data sets like altimetry or lots of other signals coming from numerical model estimates. Okay, so at this point, we have 40 years of data, observations or samples of these organisms, plus 15 contemporaneous environmental parameters. Next step here is to feed them into a model. This is a simple ANN model, but we're not going to go details, where the input to the model is the environmental conditions. So things like temperature, salinity, nutrient fields. And the output is the cell abundance of each one of these organisms. So in a sense, the input is physics and chemistry of the environment, and the output is a biological signal abundance, in this case, of the organisms. And then, like any sort of typical ML workflow, you would put aside part of the data as your holdout set or your test set, so that once the model is trained, you can compare it with these unseen data to see how good the model is going to do. And these are the comparisons. In gray, you're looking at the test set. So these are the direct observations. And in yellow, you're looking at the predictions by the model. So you can see in general, model is doing a decent job. Once happy with the model, you can, of course, feed in the entire sort of environmental variables that are basically acting as the model predictors. You can feed them into the trained model and get the model estimates of the organisms' abundances. Okay, now again, putting aside the sort of details of this study, for this sort of general class of sort of large scale multi-source type analysis, there are at least 2 major steps. One is you need data, right? You need a lot of samples, and so you need to gather a lot of training data. And I'll show you that this is really simple because all these data sets are already in the same shape. Putting them together and compiling them is also a fairly simple process. But a lot more importantly is when you want to add more insight, a lot more sort of features into your data sets where you need to join and interconnect multiple different data sets with each other. This process can be made fairly easily with CMAP and a lot more reproducible and systematic fashion. Okay, so before looking at the notebooks and see how we can actually do these type of operation, I'll give you a quick tour of our website, which is here in different desktops. So this is our website page, SimonCMAP.com or .org. The first page I want to show you is our catalog page, which is really a listing of all data sets that we have in CMAP. On the left-hand side, there's some search capability. They'll use the semantic layer, the keyword layer that I was talking about during the presentation. For example, if you want to look for phosphate, you can just put these scientific notation, or you can say phosphate. So we'll bring all the data sets that have phosphate measurements in it, or you can narrow it down, saying on phosphate, but only from a numerical model data set. You can say, you can put a cruise name, a universal name, or standard name of a cruise. I know one of that, so KOK 11606. I will return all data sets that have data from this, this cruise. So essentially, you would give it some hint, and it will return matching data sets and variables. You can, of course, narrow down your searches based on some sort of categorical criteria, like if you're looking for specifically model data sets, or you're interested in, certain specific instruments. Okay, if you click on each one of the data sets, you'll see more details about the data sets. Importantly, you get this table name here. This is the sort of the table name that you would need if you want to download the data using our programming packages. So you can get it from here. And also, if you need to get the any certain sort of variables, this short name is the variable name that you would use in our programming interfaces. To use the programming interfaces, you need to get an API key. So you would register first, and you get the API key here. And there are lots of documentation for each programming packages with code samples. If you have data you want to submit to CMAP, this is where you can find instructions. Of course, we'll be happy to help you. I'll show you quickly how you can make plots using our website. It's very simple. You pick what variable you want to make a plot for, and then you'll set date and location time. So for example, I'll look for satellite chlorophyll. So this is an 8-day average data set. This is chlorophyll, and because I want to make a map, like a 1-day map, I'll just restrict it to 1 day on 198. So January 1st, 1998. You set the a region, and then the type of visualization. I want to make a map, and typically, I didn't talk about how we really sort of technical details of how do we index data in our database, but typically data comes back like very fast, especially for the on the case of making a map. But it's not only for the maps. For example, if you so this is a pretty large region. If you want to make a time series of averaged chlorophyll over this entire region for almost 1 year, so January 1st to, let's say, December 1st, 1998, you can make a time series, and still for 1 year period, the time series will come back quite fast. And this has to do with how we actually make the database itself performing. Okay, I think that's what I'm going to say on our website. Every page has a help menu. If you had any questions, there are some content here potentially can help you. There's video tutorials and other contents you can find. But at any point, if you had questions, please feel free to contact us. Okay, so that was the website, and this is our Python package. Other packages also look quite similar to our Python package in terms of the syntax and the in terms of the API. Okay, so it's called CMAP, and it's very simple and easy to install. Like you can install CMAP. You can, by the way, run this notebook directly on Colab. You just uncomment this line to install the CMAP. You need to get an API key. I'm just putting a temporary API key here, but you need to get your own. And this line will instantiate the API class and will return you an instance of the API. And now you can call any one of the methods of our API. In this notebook, I'm just highlighting a few of our methods. The full list of the API methods you can find in our documentation. Okay, so the first one is called get catalog, which corresponds to the catalog page that I just showed you on our website. It returns all of the variables that we have in CMAP, along with their metadata, like their table name, unit, and so on and so forth. The other method I want to show you is search catalog. Again, corresponds to the search sort of features that I showed you on the website. Here I'm looking for silicate in situ, so direct observations of silicate. Because I showed you the cyanobacteria research case study. So if you want to find, for example, Prococcus, you can look for Prococcus and we'll return all data sets that have Prococcus in them. And essentially, at this point, you need to loop through this data set and these data sets and download them. And I'll show you how to download these data sets. Yep, these are obvious. So the next one is cruises. It will return all cruises in CMAP, again, along with their metadata. If you want to get the cruise trajectory, you can use the cruise trajectory. And the next one is a simple visualization, which would visualize the trajectory of a cruise. You pass the cruise name, which you can find from here, and then you can make a map of the cruise trajectory. If you want to know what measurements have been made during a cruise, you can use this method. This will return all of the measurements, the name of the variables associated with a cruise, as far as we know, of course. Okay. And here we go. This is a get data set. It's a data set that you can use to download the data set. Okay. You need to pass the table name of a data set, which you know where to find. And this method then will return the entire data set and will return in form of the appended data frame in Python. In fact, nearly all of the API methods, Python API methods, and they will all return pandas data frame in PyCMAP, which means you can use any other pandas APIs on top of these outputs. So get dataset will return the entire dataset, but if you don't want the entire dataset or the dataset is very large, you can slice it. So you can use this method called space-time, which would return just a subset of the data set based on time and location parameters. So again, in this case, we're asking for Argo data sets, salinity from Argo data sets, and these are bounding box parameters. It will return the salinity just in a slice of it, again, in the form of a pandas data frame. So this is the long track. This is a co-localization method, but it's a very special one. It only works for cruises and for the cruises that are in CMAP. So the cruise needs to be already in CMAP, and the list of cruises you can get the from the cruises method that I showed you. So if you recognize a cruise in CMAP, you can pass its name to this long track cruise, and you can co-localize that cruise with any other data sets that we have in CMAP. In this case, again, I'm co-localizing it with a data set called Seaflow, which has direct underway measurements of certain organisms, including Prococcus abundances. We also, in this case, asking for to co-localize, I just ran the command, to co-localize this cruise with phosphate estimates from Darwin measurements. So Darwin measurements, I'm sorry, I said Darwin measurement, Darwin model data set. Darwin is a model data set, and it's massive in size, very large. I'm not sure exactly how much, but it's just, we're talking about terabytes, a few terabytes. And there we go, it just came back. If one wants to do something like that, if you have like a trajectory of a cruise and you want to know the estimates of phosphate by model, you want to do that on your local machine. It's again, it's kind of an impractical way to download this entire model on the machine. Okay, so it just returned in seconds the estimates of Prococcus abundance. The measurements of Prococcus abundance from seaflow data sets, and these are estimates of phosphate by Darwin model. And sample is the co-localization method that I showed you during the presentation. It's a very general form of co-localization or data integration in CMAP. So in this case, it's not only about cruises, of course, and also the source data set. It doesn't even need to be in CMAP. You essentially pass a data frame as source, and that data frame needs to have time and location fields, and then you can co-localize that data sets with the targets data sets. Target data sets, they need to be in CMAP, and you can add as many data sets you want here. And so what this sample function will do is that it would co-localize the source data sets with targets, and will add some new columns at the end of this this source data set. For example, here it returned the original data set, and we only asked for one variables to be co-localized from SSD data sets, and just added one column at the end of this data set. It always adds, when you use the sample function, always adds the CMAP underline prefix, just to signify that this column been added by CMAP and wasn't part of the original data set. And as I said, the whole thing happens on the server side. So no data is transferred other than the actual source data set. Okay, so the last method I want to show you is called query, and it's kind of an optional type method, which means if you know SQL language, you can directly submit your SQL and get the data back. For example, if you have a very special case, or I don't know if you have like an advanced query calculations and you know SQL, you're very welcome to just directly submit a SQL command. Still, you need to know the table name, but you know where to find it. But it's completely fine to submit scan queries and get the data back. Again, you will return a data frame. Okay, so I think I'm gonna stop here. I hope I gave you a picture of what Simons CMAP is, and where is mainly our focus. We are very much interested in creating a database that is highly curated, lots of clean data, but more importantly, we would like to make the process of combining multiple different data sets with each other, we would like to make that process a lot more accessible and a lot more simpler. I hope you find it useful, and I hope you use it in your research studies. And at any point, if you had any questions, please feel free to contact us. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammad. That was great work. There is one question in the Q&A. Please ask Mohammad more questions. And this question is related to the API key. How long is the response time to get it?
The response time, it's immediate. So once you're registered, you can immediately generate the API key.
I was wondering if people would like to explore the package, if you perhaps could talk about where they can find the code on GitHub, or if they would like to contribute. Is this open source?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, so our GitHub is here. We are an Simons CMAP organization, and all of these packages and the documentations, you can find them here. Everything is like open source, like everything we have is open source, and you're definitely very welcome to contribute.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from Ali. Do you have a structured way to include uncertainties in the data, or would they just be provided as another variable column?
Good question. Yes. So when you do colocalization, it would also compute a standard deviation and will return as part of the data. Yes. And maybe I should explain a little bit more. I didn't go to details of it, but since error came out, so when you do colocalization, you would basically say, okay, colocalize my source data set with this target. So you define the variable you want to colocalize with, but you also need to define this tolerance parameters. And what it means is the tolerance is essentially the tightness, the degree of tightness for matching between target and the source data set. For example, in this example, you have this cruise trajectory. At any point in this cruise trajectory, you can say within plus or minus n day, and within plus or minus n degrees in latitude, longitude, and depth directions, find any data in the target data set, in this case, temperature from satellite, and then average out those, find the average of those values and compute the standard deviation of those. So the concept of variation, standard deviation, is closely connected with the tolerance parameters that you would define here. If you need still more this sort of explanation, we have documentation. So you can look in documentation and see what each one of these items here in the tolerance list, what do they mean?
Thank you. Here's another question. about the future of this project. I'm curious myself in terms of size, data sets, if there are any limitations, future funding, where is it going?
Mm-hmm. So the project is generously funded by Simons CMAP, and in terms of the data and how big essentially can get. I didn't again talk about too much about our database layer, but we have a hybrid model of on-premise type database servers as well as cloud clusters. And the cloud cluster, we have it in a way that it can scale indefinitely. So if we want to scale a lot more, and then we can scale there. And we use on-prems for sort of typical data sets. Sometimes our data sets that are like several petabytes. For that, we only it only makes sense to use our cloud clusters. Otherwise, we use our on-prem servers. And so hopefully there's no issue in terms of scaling up and adding a lot more data sets. How bigger it can get, I'm not quite sure, not sure where it can go, but like we have tried to be focused on how to create the required sort of machineries to actually scale indefinitely.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up question here too about that. Curious about the backend data hosting. Is it all AWS or is it some other?
Good question. Yeah, that's exactly what I was pointing to. Yeah, so part of our data, it's a hybrid model. Part of our data is on-prem sort of servers. We manage it directly at UW. And we will try to route most of our requests to those servers that are very sort of specifically designed for this type of data schema. So I talked about the space-time type data and how efficient to return them. It's very closely related to our hardware and how we design them. But for data sets that are truly massive, so for example, we have data from MIT GCM model at like, I don't know, 100 meters resolution, an hour global, is just like massive. And so for those, they are on AWS, but the actual data architecture is Spark clusters. It's a lakehouse, so-called architecture on Spark clusters.
All right, I don't see other questions. I would like to thank you very much for giving the seminar tonight. And I wish you all the best, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.